The only thing better than reading Kate DiCamillo's captivating and award-winning novels and books is getting to meet her in person in a library.
How many of y'all have read Because of Winn-Dixie? I knew I liked you.
In fact, the only problem is that she's so genuine and funny and real that you start to forget that you're talking to the Kate DiCamillo, two-time winner of the Newbery Medal and one of the most successful and beloved children's authors on the planet.
So I forgot, what was the question?
Oh yeah, well I don't remember.
No, we were gonna do writing.
Oh yes,
routines.
what are your habits like?
Yeah.
Speaking of that, DiCamillo's current novel, Raymie Nightingale, is also quickly becoming a classic. A finalist for the 2016 National Book Award, Raymie is about a young girl who finds grace and friendship during what should have been the worst summer of her life. The story, which takes place in DiCamillo's home state of Florida in the summer of 1975, was inspired by events in her own childhood.
Yeah, it is absolutely the truth, and it's not the truth at all, but it is the emotional truth.
Raymie's story also represents another breakthrough for DiCamillo. Despite desperate pleas from her fans for sequels over the years, she has never felt the need to return to one of her stories, until now. This fall, she'll release a companion book to Raymie called Louisiana's Way Home.
This voice of Louisiana, who is one of the characters in Raymie's story, just would not go away. And she just was so insistent. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna tell this story.
Find out how DiCamillo does that and what it's like to introduce generations of kids, including my own, to the life-changing magic of reading.
Sometimes it makes me cry. You know, it's like it's so overwhelming.
In this edition, a first-person, one-on-one with Kate DiCamillo, presented by St. Louis County Library and The Novel Neighbor and HEC.
Welcome, Kate DiCamillo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm ready to talk.
Oh, good. You're at the right place. We are so excited to have you here because for my daughters, you were the author. Like 2 of your books, Winn-Dixie and Edward Tulane, were the ones that just like pushed them into
becoming readers.
Yeah, I just felt like those were the books where they discovered the magic.
Isn't that the best? And it's like, I just feel so lucky when I get to be the writer but anytime any book opens the door to all the other books, it thrills me. But then it's a double thrill to think that I got to be there, you know.
So you're on your summer reading tour, right? That's what's brought you here to St. Louis?
That's right.
Are we first stop or have you been going?
Yes, after this we go to Cleveland, so.
Now that sounds like a really fun way to spend a summer.
Well, I tell you what, anytime I have to say, I am genuinely passionate about reading, and so to get out and talk to people, to connect with the readers, but also to talk to people about the importance of it. And also I served a couple of years ago as the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. You have to have a platform and you go out and talk about, you know, you pick kind of a theme for your tenure. And I talked so much about how I think we've forgotten sometimes what a privilege it is to be able to do it, to have access to books, to be able to walk into a library and check out any book that you want, and also just the joy of it. So that's kind of, I'm so glad to keep on sending that message.
It's funny because touring can be hard. It's sort of this departure from normal life.
I mean, and I'm an introvert, you know, and it is, so I've been doing this, you know, writing and being a writer on the road for 18 years now. And it's taken me a long time to figure out that as much as I am an introvert, I also really need and love this part of it, because it's the connection that I feel as a reader, it becomes manifest when I go out and talk to readers who are reading my books, but reading other books. And so it's just like it's a wonderful thing. It's very tiring to me as a shy person, but it's also, it gives me so much to connect with people that way.
What's that moment like when you kind of walk in and you see all those little faces looking up
Sometimes,
at you?
Sometimes it makes me cry. You know, it's like it's so overwhelming because it's it's that books matter. And you know, we hear so much, we're so worried about kids and electronics and
digital
age, and I just see so many kids holding books, and the books really matter to them. And so that's part of what makes me tear up, just these kids as readers. And then the other thing is, you know, there's still a part of me that's like hoping I'm gonna get published, you know, and so I can't believe that I'm here and that I've gotten to write the books have been published, and people read the books.
Yeah, that's true, because I still have every book that was important to me as a child.
Absolutely. And that's something else that has happened more and more, because I have adults who come through the line who are teachers or parents and had my books read to them, and are now reading my books to their students or their children. And so that's something else that is just, you know, I cry a lot in the signing lines.
Oh my gosh, that gives me chills just to think of that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
To be that thread line through a family, wow.
Which is the great thing about children's books, is like what matters to you, you then take into the classroom as a teacher, or take to your children when you read to them. So it's great. Children's books keep on going.
So your current book now is Raymie Nightingale, and you've got a sequel or a part of a series now coming out in the fall, is that right?
Yeah, I think that the publicity team is calling it a companion novel. So I always like to adopt their language. It's not really, I mean, it is a standalone. So if you didn't read Raymie, you could pick up Louisiana's Way Home, which is this next book, and it would make sense, but it's not necessary to read them in any particular order.
It's interesting too, because on your website you note that you often get asked about sequels to many of your other works.
I do, so much, to the point where, you know, sometimes it's relatively threatening. And I've never, ever felt compelled to go back and revisit a character.
Why was this story different?
You know, it was not intention. I have a notebook where I keep like a running list of ideas, and also where I'll just kind of like let myself cogitate. And this voice of Louisiana, who is one of the characters in Raymie's story, just would not go away. And she just was so insistent. And I thought, okay, I'm going to tell this story, but this is the only book also that I've done in first person since, because of Winn-Dixie. And so I was very reluctant to do it in first person, because you give up a lot of control. And also it's so easy to make a mistake, because that willing suspension of disbelief has to be there for the reader. Okay, you know, but Louisiana was not having it any other way but first person. So there you go.
I know you've said writing's hard, it's hard work, but was Louisiana's story easier in a way, having already laid the groundwork with Raymie?
Every book is hard in a different way, and this one, the big struggle was up front, in that I had the voice and I did not want to tell it in first person, so I spent a lot of time turning and trying to tell it, okay, I'll do third person this way, or I'll tell it via letters this way, so I'll have some from, and it only became easy when I gave up that battle and went into full first person.
And surrendered to...
Exactly, surrendered is the perfect word for this child, Louisiana, yes, yeah.
And of course I have to ask, will Beverly get a book?
I hope so.
I loved Beverly.
Oh, you know, Beverly was the kind of kid that I very much wanted to be, where she was tough, capable, but also, you know, there's the moment in Raymie Nightingale where she goes in there and takes Alice Nebley's hand and hums to her. And it's just like, I wanted to be brave in all of those ways, and I was brave in none of those ways. Yeah.
Two more just about Raymie. I know a lot of the viewers watching this and a lot of the fans you'll meet tonight have read it, but it's still fairly new.
Yeah, it is still fairly new. So It is the story of Raymie Clark, whose father leaves the family, and Raymie gets this idea that if she enters the Little Miss Central Florida Tire Contest and wins it, her father will see her picture in the paper and come home. I started the book with the idea of the Little Miss Central Florida Tire Contest, which seemed very funny to me. And I thought it was going to be just a funny book. And then I'm like, why is a kid like Raymie in this contest to begin with? And then I realized that this, there was something larger afoot, and the larger afoot is very much connected to me because my father left when I was young, and I spent a lot of time trying to think, what could I do to get him back?
You've written about children dealing with loss and parental loss, but as you mentioned, this is sort of the most personal almost.
It is, yeah, and it's, it is absolutely the truth, and it's not the truth at all, but it is the emotional truth of and since the very first book, I've been answering the question, why is there a missing parent? And so often it's been the mother, and I've always said, well, that's kind of like I think there's enough psychic distance because it was my mother who stayed, and then I finally confronted the truth head on and had the father go.
What was that process like for you? I know, as you said, each book is hard in its own way. How did that maybe, I don't want to say complicate, but how did that sort of create challenges?
Well, it was one of those things where I realized relatively soon that I was driving on very thin ice for myself emotionally, and for any time I'm writing a book, I never know what's going on. There are larger themes that I can see out of the corner of my eye, and I know my job is not to look at them. So, but that whole thing was heightened here, and so it became very perilous that I would mess it up if I examined it too closely and how it related to me. And also the other thing was, it was like one of those, I've never had this experience before, where every sentence felt like it had 20 other sentences underneath it. So it was like the first drafts were massive, and then I started to just pare stuff away.
You've talked about losing your mother not that long ago, really.
Yeah, and it will be 10 years.
Which actually isn't that long.
No,
right?
no.
It seems like 10 minutes ago, probably,
Yeah.
right? Could you have written this or gone down this road while she was still alive?
Wow, what a fascinating question. Probably not. And it's really interesting because Flora and Ulysses, I wrote the Newbery speech for that, and it ended up being very much about my mother and what my mother gave to me as a reader. She never, ever failed me as a reader, and I gave that speech at the American Library Association, and I realized afterwards that what I had done, I had eulogized my mother in a way that it took that amount of time to do.
She is the person who drove me to the Cooper Memorial Public Library twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. She is the person who bought me books. She is the person who read to me.
And I never fully grasped while she was alive this great gift that she gave to me. So I think that there's a progression there from that realization to then the writing of Raymie. I think that it's somewhere on a continuum. No one's ever asked me that, though. It's very interesting.
Well, I just watched it like 2 or 3 nights ago, so I think it was so raw for me too, that I could just feel the pain of that loss.
Yeah, and also
so
just the recognition of the gift that she gave me. And it was so deeply moving to do that in a room full of people who believe in the power of story as much as I do, and who work at doing what my mother did, which was to put books into people's hands,
It leads me to another question, in that you feel like as a child, at a certain age, you're sort of an open wound for a good couple of years there. Yeah. And then you kind of learn how to mask it a bit, but it's still sort of there underneath. And then it occurs to me that as a writer, you have to open that back up in order to really do what you do.
Yep. There's a quote from Catherine Patterson, which I can't remember how it goes, but you have to have, your heart has to be absolutely exposed, and you have to have the hide of a rhinoceros, both things. And those are, of course, contradictory, but yes, it's true. It made me think, for some reason, when you were saying that, of this is in Boston about a year and a half ago, and a 10-year-old boy stood up, and his question was, you deal with a lot of philosophical, we're in Cambridge, a lot of philosophical issues in this book, and I just wonder why you're putting so much philosophy into a book for kids. And I said, no one had ever asked me that question. And I said, it's because kids are the ones that are willing to have those conversations, because when you talked about closing down, that's part of becoming an adult too. So your heart closes up, and also you stop asking those gigantic questions because they're so scary, and because you get laughed at for asking them, but kids are still asking them. So that's exactly where they should be, is in books for kids.
Did you always want to be a writer, or was it something you were almost scared to want because it was so special and important? Or how did you evolve from a child who just loved books and words?
Yeah, and it's when I talk about this in front of a group of kids, I'll say to them, how many of you have had a writer come to your school, or how many of you have come to another library event or bookstore event where you've met a writer? And it's probably like the majority of hands go up. And I say, when I was growing up, one, we didn't do creative writing, and two, I really genuinely never gave the writer as a human being any credence at all. I just didn't think the books were so special. I didn't think that people had anything to do with them, really, and so I never thought about, oh, somebody can do this. And I got the idea, which I'm sure you know because I've talked about it, and making myself sound just as ridiculous as I am ad nauseum, but the idea became cemented in my head in college at the University of Florida. And when I had a professor say to me, you have a certain facility with words, full stop. You should consider graduate school, full stop. And I was, 20 years old, and I thought, he's trying to tell me, you're super talented. You're going to be a famous writer. Why should I bother with graduate school? So that's when I got the idea. And I didn't go to graduate school, and I spent a long time wanting to write. And I didn't actually start until I was 30.
How did you finally get over that hurdle?
I realized I was going to die talking about something that I wanted to do. And it actually, and I don't talk about this a whole lot, but the light bulb that went on for me was I ran, and I would run 2 miles a day. And one day I got back from a run, and I thought, I can run 2 miles a day. I'm not passionate about running, but I've been doing this for like a couple of years, and I've committed to it. But this thing that I say that I want, I haven't done anything about at all. So then I thought, okay, I'm gonna do two pages a day.
Did you try other career fields as a way to escape
I had
it?
no other, nothing even approaching a career, because I always thought I'm gonna, I'm a writer, I'm gonna be a writer. So I worked at Circus World, I worked at Walt Disney World, I worked in a greenhouse growing variegated philodendrons. I worked as a secretary at an ad agency. So I worked in bookstores, I worked at a book distributor, but I never had a career.
It's funny because I feel like when you are a writer, or at least someone who loves stories, that even when you're doing those other jobs, in that job you're actually a writer observing them.
Oh yeah, that's,
Did you find that?
and the great thing was that when I finally started to write, I had moved from Florida to Minnesota, and pretty soon after I started writing, and I got a job in a book warehouse, and I got up really early to go to that job, and I would write before I went in. And so for the rest of the day, It was just like the real work has already been done. And I walked around with this, just like this little golden ball inside of me, thinking I've already done the real work, and everything, you know, yes, everything became something that could go into a story.
You've talked so much about observing and how crucial that is. Were you like that as a child too, sort of drinking in the scene?
Yes, I had a friend named Kathy Lord who would ask to sharpen her pencil like 72 times a day so that she could walk from the back of the room up to the front of the room, staring at everything that everybody was doing and with her mouth hanging open. And she was super interested in everything, and so was I, but I was afraid to stare so unabashedly. And so a lot of times I'll think, be like Kathy Lord on the way to the pencil sharpener. That's your job, yeah. But don't have your mouth hanging open, because Kathy was like,
That is so funny, because I remember that too, always being very snoopy, but then trying to cover, like, didn't want anyone to know I was watching them, but I couldn't. I was just a like pathological people watcher.
yeah, and I still am. Yep.
What are your writing habits like now? So I know you live in Minneapolis. How did you end up in Minneapolis anyway? Nothing.
It was kind of like a pre-midlife crisis. It's just like I knew that I had to do something different. And I had a friend who was from there and was moving back and needed a roommate. And I thought, okay, I'll go. And I knew nothing about it. I knew it was cold, but I thought, how cold can it be? And I found out.
You found out, right?
Yeah, so I've been there for 24 years now, and I love it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I forgot, what was the question?
Oh yeah, well I don't remember.
No, we were gonna do writing.
Oh yes,
routines.
what are your habits like now as a writer?
So I started with that 2 pages a day thing, and that's basically still where I am. I mean, I do multiple sessions of 2 pages a day when I'm in the final edits of something, but I always tell myself every time I sit down, okay, you can get up as soon as the 2 pages are done, because I never want to sit down, and it's like a way to talk myself into it. As soon as the 2 pages are done, you can get up.
Do you write all the time, like throughout the year, or do you take breaks after a novel?
I will take, like right now I've got a novel that I'm working on, and I've got something a little bit shorter that I'm working on, and I do multiple drafts of something, so I'll take part of the novel like through the second draft, and then I'll put it aside and come back to the shorter thing, which is maybe in the third draft, and so I'll go back and forth, and I'll give myself a couple days off in between, 3 or 4 days.
Do you find the magic happens when you've taken a break and have time to sort of go over what you've written, or does it happen in the moment when you're writing?
I'm waiting for the magic at any point.
Come find me.
Yeah, okay. I'm here, magic. I find the magic is entirely unpredictable. You never know, and it's the one thing that I've learned is like when you think I'm gonna toss this aside, that's the day it might open. So I just keep on. The magic is in showing up every day.
Do you know how your stories are going to end?
I have no idea, no, which is a relatively terrifying way to write. You know, sometimes I'll have an image that I'm working towards, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. And if I think about it too much, it's the same as, you know, thinking about themes and the deeper meaning of stuff. I'll mess it up, so I don't.
Once you've locked onto an ending, does it stick, or have you ever sort of tried different or?
I have, an ending has never seriously changed from draft to draft once I make it to the ending. So it's like, and I do kind of write in a linear fashion too, which surprises me.
That's true. Some authors will sort of jump around a bit.
But it goes from start to finish, even though it looks like a crazy person wrote it. Yeah.
Place is very important in all your stories.
Yeah,
so you live in Minnesota, but you're a Florida girl, and Raymie Nightingale is set in Florida.
Yeah, Florida really, really shaped me. And the South really, really shaped me. And growing up on a dead-end street with, it was young families on one side, and on the other side there were 3 widow ladies, Mrs. Lucas, Mrs. Lindeman, and Mrs. Broadfield, and we were welcome all of us kids on the street to come into their houses and talk with them. And that had a profound effect on me.
We talk about how childhood has changed, but have children changed?
I don't think so. I think it's the same profound need for connection and illumination and story that I had. That's, one of the great gifts of doing this is being able to connect with kids in person, and finding out how much the 8-year-old me is still so present,
And I've heard you mention that the title is the one thing that's easy for you.
Well, the names are the one thing that's easy for me. So the character names. And the titles go into the very, I'm pretty good with coming up with titles, but the names are spontaneous almost. I don't know where they come from. They just kind of pop into my head. And the titles, I usually go back looking through the manuscript for a phrase that seems right.
Your books have such a magical quality grounded in realism. How do you do that? What's your secret?
There's that moment in Raymie where she's in the nursing home and the floor is so highly polished that it looks like a lake. It's reflecting all of this light. And she has this sudden feeling that she's going to understand something, that everything's going to make sense. That feeling, I think, is like it's that we're right on the, it's kind of what I think of as peripheral magic. It's magic that's right out of the corner of your eye. And it's, to me, one of the great gifts of children's books is, so there's, when you write for kids, you're duty bound, as Catherine Patterson says, to end with hope. And the other gift of books for children is that peripheral magic. Magic is, it might not be, front and center magic, but there's that glimmering possibility always that you can catch sight of out of the corner of your eye. And that I'm always aware of.
And in Raymie's case, it doesn't mean that what she wants comes to be. But
something wonderful happens in any case. There's still miracles. Yeah.
Right, that's true. Something that grows out of it.
Right.
So you've also talked on your website about the fact that you don't have children. You have furry children, but
right.
And animals are a huge part of
Yeah,
all
they
your
are.
novels.
Yeah. It's like something I've been trying to explain now, and it just gets more complicated all the time because it's just like that's animals. And I don't have any one answer for it. I think it's because I love them. And also because it's like an animal protagonist, I think we're a little bit more likely to trust. And then I think that the books that made me so happy when I was a kid, I think about Paddington and Stuart Little and Ralph S. Mouse, and I think that those books really, those animals spoke to me.
When you talk about writing, it just sounds like a vocation and a calling, and just there's such a reverence. And when I've read what you've written about being a writer, it's so, it just comes right across just how honored you feel.
I feel part of it is just this thing of the wonder of being able to figure out what it is that I'm supposed to do, then to get to do it, and then to, like, the third level of that is to connect with people. So it's not just that I have found that I'm supposed to write and that I get to write, but it's that people read what I write and I get to connect to them, and it's just, it seems miraculous to me.
Kate DiCamillo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.